Welcome everyone. My name is Doug Purnell. I'm one of the co-leaders of the Triad Microsoft Data Platform User Group. We're located in the Triad area of North Carolina, which is in Greensboro. And we've been online for a good while now with our friend COVID, but I'll go over a few updates and we'll let Julie kick things off. So we are part of the Azure data community. One of the nice things that Microsoft has done during the pandemic is sort of unified some of the user groups after the past organization sort of shifted. And so you'll find other user groups at the URL below as well. So it's been nice that we've been able to unify again. So upcoming events. So one of the nice things with the SQLsaturday.com website is they list their events. There's one coming up in Orlando in October, but they also list the other events going on. So if any of the other events are useful to you, just head out to datasaturday.com and you'll see the events listed there. And a lot of good stuff coming up. For those of you that didn't know, sort of all of the past conferences are now free, available, all the recordings underneath YouTube SQL Pass TV. So head out there, and I think it goes back to 2014 or 2013. So a lot of good information. A lot of the stuff with the SQL engine is still the same. I'm going back a few years, so you can still learn a lot of good stuff as well. We have our YouTube channel. We're recording this, and so this will be posted sometime tomorrow. You can go back and see some of the sessions we've had as well. So if you can't stay for the whole session, just head over to the YouTube channel. And one of the benefits, there was a Pass Pro option, and this is now housed underneath Redgate's website. If you go to the educational series, they have 4 courses there, and you'll find those sessions there, and they're all free, besides other things that Redgate offers. So give that a look if that interests you. And it's my pleasure to introduce Julie Koesmarno. Koesmarno. She works for Microsoft, and she's going to give us sort of an overview of how notebooks work underneath Azure Data Studio. So with that, I will stop sharing, and you are welcome to start.
Thank you, Doug. All right, Let me share my screen. Hopefully,
that looks
you
great.
are seeing the Notebooks 101 for SQL people. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. All right, just let me make sure that I can access the chat because I do want to hear you as well. How do I do this? Oh, there it is, the chat. All right, so folks, if you have any questions, please do ask on the chat, and then I'll take a look every now and again. So I'll pause and then I'll take a look at the questions. With that, I'm going to start with, hi everyone, my name is Julie Koesmarno. I am a program manager at Microsoft. So I've been working with Jupyter Notebooks quite a bit, actually, almost 2 years, and actually a little bit longer than that, but specifically on the notebooks development inside Azure Data Studio itself, it's almost 2 years. Now, my background is SQL. That's how I started my career, and I thought it's fabulous. And then I got into a little bit more the data science sort of world, analytics sort of world, and that's how I got into notebooks. And then I thought, hey, you know what? SQL people actually can use notebooks. And so in the last probably year and a half or so, if you follow me on Twitter, I'm SQL Girl, or my website also, I'm sqlgirl.com. I should have put my website there, but I didn't. You would probably see me talk a lot about notebooks, mainly about notebooks use cases for SQL people. And one of the biggest one that I've seen so far, especially talking to a large number of users, a large number of database users, a lot of the use cases for notebooks usually are for troubleshooting. So if I have a chance, I will like to cover that as well. So before I get started, if you use your phone and if you use that QR code, it will point you to the previous presentation that I did called SQL Saturday Vienna. And that has my GitHub link, which tells you the kinds of notebooks or the session notes that I covered at the time when I did for SQL Saturday Vienna. So I think that's also a good kind of references for you to get to as well in the in later, or if you want to follow along, you can too. And if I remember correctly, I also published the PowerPoint there too. So if you want to follow along, you can. So I haven't changed too much on the slide deck. Now, before I get started, since it's an intimate sort of group of people, so I wanted to ask you, have you used Jupyter Notebooks before? That way I can tailor this session for you. Anybody? Andrew, Joseph, Denise, or Doug?
So I have seen it, sort of used it a tiny bit, but very little, and not within Azure.
Okay, sure. Joseph or Denise?
No, I never, even try go that far.
Okay. All right, Joseph or Doug?
This is Doug. Yeah, so we just started using them. So we just did some quick tests with code blocks and text blocks and just trying to figure out how they work for us. So it looks exciting.
Okay, awesome. And Joseph, did you wanted to share something?
I'm interested, but I haven't tried it yet.
Okay, awesome. This is perfect. So I'm going to tailor this for you since it's a smaller group of people, right? All right, so notebooks. All right, here we go. So we'll cover a couple of things. So the what notebooks are about, why notebooks, and how to get started, especially if you're coming from SQL background. Now, there's a little bit of assumption that you come from SQL, but if you're not from SQL, then I'll touch a little bit on the Python and other languages as well. And because it's versatile, so that's actually one of the ways I actually learn new languages. Like, for example, I have been using R a lot. I didn't use Python until I actually used Jupyter Notebooks. So it's a great way to learn. So and then I'll share with you the takeaways and resources. So roughly, this is what notebooks look like. And I'm more of a kind of demo person, so I'm going to jump straight to Azure Data Studio. So this is what Azure Data Studio looked like when you first launch it. It is an open source desktop client tool. So it's desktop. See how it's a window here. So it's a desktop client tool. So it's open source, it's free. So you can use Azure Data Studio on your Windows environment, Linux, or Mac OS. And it's intended to be that way. So if you're coming from the existing world or previous world or current world still SSMS, so imagine if we have new users who are coming from Linux, then they cannot use SSMS. So how do they access their data? So we're trying to make it easier for Linux as well as macOS users. And we usually recommend folks to get started with Azure Data Studio. So if you're still doing a lot of heavyweight DBA sort of work, you probably still want to use SSMS, but in most cases, Azure Data Studio should cover a lot of the database sort of workload. And the good thing about Azure Data Studio is that, and I'll show you now, is that Azure Data Studio supports not just only connecting to SQL Server. So this is my SQL Server environment. And then this is the SQL DB demo here is my Azure SQL DB environment. ADX demo is Azure Data Explorer, and then I also have Azure Monitor Logs. So Azure Data Studio is very helpful to connect to on-prem SQL Server environment or instances, as well as quite a large number of Azure data sources. So Azure Data Explorer, Azure SQL DB, Azure SQL MI, believe Synapse also work as well, SQL Server on VM as an example. So it's a great way to kind of get you started browsing your data online or on Azure or on-prem. All right, so with that, I'm going to get started with a notebook. So there are a couple of ways of connecting to or creating a new notebook. So obviously you can go new and then new notebook, or file and then new notebook, right? So now I'm going to show you a different way of creating a new notebook, which is connected to this white world importers database. So if I right click, it will have new notebook. So what it's going to do is it's going to connect to a SQL kernel, and it's going to attach to that database white world importers. So let me just minimize this, that way we get more real estate. So essentially, when you think about Notebook, you'll see kernel here. So you can think of kernel as if it's a language or engine that you want to connect to. It's more of a language, actually. So if you connect to SQL, then you can now start typing SQL code. So because I've connected to the SQL DB demo wide world importers, I'm just going to take a look quickly. I have a table called purchase orders. So I can start typing select top 10 star from. So this is nice, where it has the whole IntelliSense. I can simply tap, and then it will help me complete the my query, which is super handy. So from here, maybe I can put PO, something like this, then PO dot. Okay, I want to analyze. Maybe is order finalized, and then maybe count, and then maybe group by, and then just copy the top part. So I'm just summarizing this data, really. So I type that, and then it comes back with results. So it's, if you're familiar with SQL already today, so essentially this code cell here allows you to simply type your code, your SQL code, because you're using SQL kernel and you're attaching yourself to this database. You can change your connection if you want to. And so this is how you change your connection. You can type in, maybe I'll use the SQL DB demo. So instead of using my my wide world importers, maybe I want to connect to AdventureWorks. So that's a way of connecting to a different database. So I'm going to cancel for now. So another thing about Notebook is the fact that you can actually add a text cell. So by default, the text cell is added on the bottom, so after the cell. So let me just move it up, and then because I want to add a title, so maybe I want to call it, so this is the markdown mode. Hello. So if you're familiar with GitHub, it uses Markdown. It's the same Markdown language here. So this is a simple query, and that's it. And if I want to preview it, then I can click on this split mode, which allows me to kind of essentially, oh, what just happened there? Let's see if I can do this again. Yeah, something's not quite right with my Zoom. Anyway, so on the right here, there's a there are 3 buttons. So this is the WYSIWYG mode. The second one is the split view, and then the last one is Markdown mode. Azure Data Studio is probably the only desktop client tool that allows you to do a WYSIWYG. So essentially, what you see is what you get. So if you type in something like this, then that's it. Like it's just updated immediately. And yeah, so I find it really useful if you want to use WYSIWYG. It's really useful if you want to, if you don't feel like, you know, typing up Markdown. I myself have familiar myself with Markdown because of GitHub and everything else. So I tend to write things in Markdown. So yeah, so this is a quick example of writing a simple notebook with code cell, and you can obviously add another code cell, and you know, type in another, maybe select top 10 star from sys.objects or something like that, and then you can just kind of run that. So what happens is sometimes, actually not sometimes, what happens is if I save this notebook and then share it with you, you'll be able to see the text cell, the code cell, as well as the results. And this is key. And this is actually quite important. And this is one of the reasons why I like Notebook so much, is because the fact that I can save the results with the actual code cell itself. And it also is super helpful if I want to do, say, for example, like analysis sharing with somebody else. And say if I want to clear the results because maybe it's sensitive, like for example, this sys.objects, maybe it's too sensitive to share with other people, then I click on the ellipsis here, and then I would say clear results, and that's it. It goes away, there's no more results. Now, some of you who actually are coming from the SQL Server world, or a lot of the, or even Postgres actually. What happens is each code cell here is actually its own batch. So what that means is if you say, for example, put something like declare variable is order finalized or something like that, and then you declare it as maybe bit, and then if you maybe set this to 1 over here, if you want to do select at is order finalized or is order fin, it's going to come up with an error. It's because it's like, this is its own batch of execution, so it's isolated from the next cell. So that's one of the things that you have to think about when you create a notebook with SQL. However, if you are using Python or PowerShell, because they are session-based, not so much batch-based, the way SQL works. So in Python and PowerShell, if you declare variable and then you call it in the next cell, then it should work. So that's one of the kind of gotchas. If you're coming from an existing Jupyter Notebook world, if you are familiar with Python, so this is where a lot of the time I get questions on whether variable can be passed from one code cell to another, which the answer is for SQL, no, but Python, yes, PowerShell, yes. So I'm going to pause there for a little bit. Is there any question on this?
Julia, I think the Python in the SQL Server, you talk about the batch mode, there's the same thing. Python's the same thing, correct?
I don't think I understand the question. Can you repeat that again?
Yeah. And then you just talk about this code, this query. Yeah, this query is sort of like a batch mode, right? It just
yeah.
Can you hear me okay, right? No.
Yeah, I can hear you.
When you talk about Python, because I'm programming Python, I think Python is the same way as you just said that. It's similar as a SQL Server, the query. It's the same thing, the same way as a batch mode. I believe so.
For Python, it's not quite. So if you have a Python code here, let's see. I'm going to make something up here. And my mind right now is in PowerShell, so I may not get this right. So A equals to 1. If I run this print A, it should be A equals to 1, right? So this is what I meant by batch mode. So if I do print A here, it works. See, this is session-based because it remembers. So the variable is carried on to the next one. Whereas if I do it here, see how I've already defined it on the top part here. If I call is order fin, it's not going to work. See how it says you must declare the scalar variable. So the variable is not carried over from one cell to another because it's executing in batch mode. Whereas in Python, it's session-based. So if I declare this, it should know this. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, okay, all right. So I'm gonna jump to PowerPoint for a little bit because there's this fun scenario that I wanted to play with you. So this is how I actually got started with notebooks in the first place, and it's been great so far. But this is essentially how I got started, where somebody in the business department essentially asked me, "Hey, I need to know which product has the fastest turnaround," and then I had to, figure out the query for it. So I started with SQL query. It's simple stuff like select top 10 stuff from production.product. And then I start querying again, just this is more data exploration, right? So it's pretty normal to write a couple of queries until I get the answer. Once I've got the right query, I usually copy and paste the results to Excel. And then I will share it with the person who asked me the question. And then they say, hey, that was good, but I need the product category. So guess what? I have to change the query. So here we go. I started writing a longer query. And then I would have to copy the results again in Excel file and then share it with them again. And then they would ask again, hey, is that for the last quarter? And you mean sold products or something else? And so I started with longer query, another longer query, and then, save the results in an Excel file again, and then share it with them again, right? So they say, oh, you're a rock star. Hey, it's all good. And so, but in the back end, like in my file, this is what it looks like, where I started accumulating scripts after scripts after scripts. And if I don't name it properly, if I don't comment it properly, then that's a bit of a nightmare. So this is where it gets even worse, actually, because many days later, somebody, the same person from the business department asked me, hey, remember that list? Can you refresh it? And I went, it's been a few days or many days. I don't remember which list, so I have to start looking and digging and running the query again and give the results back again. And then they will ask, can you compare it with last result? Can you show me what changed? What did you do? Because I wasn't expecting this. So this is where, panic happens, right? And this is essentially where I started thinking, hey, it's like playing Jenga with SQL scripts. So, and this actually has happened to me quite a bit, and it's not nice. So the problem with this is that, or the problem with the workflow that I just showed you, which is actually quite common, especially for people who are kind of doing data analysis or troubleshooting, really, is that when you have scripts and output separated, it's usually hard to produce based on the output. So sometimes when you have to go back to it, they give you the Excel file equivalent, and you go, oh, geez, what was the script that I wrote for that Excel file or that result set? And then if you somehow manage, organize your file meticulously, that it actually works really nicely, that which Excel file goes to which query, then the next question is, say if I want you to review my code, you probably are thinking, yeah, the code looks good, but sometimes when you're actually working with data, looking at the code itself is not enough. Sometimes you kind of actually have to understand what is the output that it's going to give you. So having able to do a peer review or code review in where the code and the output itself actually is included, actually is super helpful. And then the third problem is that, hey, I've executed this script, yesterday, it should work. It should work again now, but that might not be the case. And it might actually give the different results. So this is one of those things where when you do troubleshooting, you kind of have to know at what point in time are you troubleshooting. Like, for example, if the problem is already fixed and you run the same query today, then it might not give the same results, right? So that's where the auditing problem comes in. And sometimes if you share scripts with other people, if you don't document it enough, then the challenge is, people are asking questions like, what is this script about? Like, the context. And then lastly, and this is where I mentioned earlier about troubleshooting guide, when you do troubleshooting, so for example, you get an incident. So if you're a DBA, you get an incident assigned to you and you have to run certain things. A lot of the time you have to do kind of copying and pasting of the query and then pasting it into, say, XSMS. Whereas if you actually have organized your troubleshooting guides into notebook shape, then the beauty of it is that you don't have to do this copying and pasting anymore. You simply open the notebook, just like I showed you earlier, use the notebook, run the code, and then the result is there. So less copying and pasting and hopefully less human errors. And if you're really, really good, which I have seen in a few places that they've done this, is that they parameterize their notebook. And this is a little bit more on the advanced topic. They parameterize the notebook such that users only have to provide the input parameter or variable, and then it will execute the notebook and gives you the right data. So there's less of code changes, but it's a bit more programmatic. So this is very helpful for the PowerShell and Python scenario. In the DBA world, a lot of folks are actually using PowerShell. So this actually would work really, really well. So I'm going to touch on that a little bit more. So essentially, Notebook helps you with a lot of different factors. So first of all, to a certain degree, it forces you to do documentation. And it helps you with the executable aspect. It helps you with, being able to capture code results, visualization if you want to, which I actually haven't shown yet. And then it allows you to also capture the analysis and interpretation, all just with notebooks. Now, remember, if you were, I don't know if you, I think this, to me, it was back in like high school where we have school science project, right? They usually give this, sheet for us to fill in, like what is the question, what is the research observation, what is your hypothesis, what materials and what procedures do you use for the experiment, what is the results, what is the conclusions, new questions, notes for next time. So this method is actually being used by data scientists a lot of the cases for EDA, exploratory data analysis. And it turns out that whenever we interview users who are using, who are working on troubleshooting sort of world, so incident response sort of world, whenever they get an incident or they get an issue, guess what? They actually exercise this, like when they look at an issue, they kind of go, I think the problem is with this. So I'm going to write this query or I'm going to write this code to verify that my hypothesis is right. Oh, it doesn't look like it's right. I check the query, so that's not good. Or the code says that it's not this problem. Okay, my next hypothesis is this. So they start going through some analysis of what is currently happening. So troubleshooting guide is actually, a lot of the cases is diagnosis of what's going on. And data scientists use Jupyter Notebooks a lot for the EDA activities. So we think that Jupyter Notebook is also ideal for the troubleshooting guide scenarios as well. So yeah, I'm going to pause there and see if there are any questions.
Julie, I have a question. Is there any way to use the results that you get from SQL? Like if I get two sets of results and I want to compare them or put them together in a result or something?
So I think, so if I understand the question, so if you have two result sets from notebooks, is it possible to compare them?
Is it possible to do other things with them? Not just compare them, but
I see.
is there any way to take them and treat them like inputs to something else? Yeah.
So essentially make it as part of the logic. If you're using SQL kernel, the answer is unfortunately no. But if you are using PowerShell, which actually does support SQL statements, then you can do something. Then you can start building kind of the logic, like from previous execution, inspect this, and then start running something else.
Can you show us a little bit of that?
Yeah, I don't have anything handy right now, but
maybe at the end. I mean, at the end of time, because that sounds like it could be incredibly powerful.
Yeah. I'll have to, let me see if I have something handy. Yeah. Okay. All right. So the next set of slides, great question, Andrew. So I like that question. All right. So the next set of questions, the next set of slides that I want to show you is related to the ecosystem itself. And I want to bring this up because when you start using Jupyter Notebook, in some cases, people might actually ask you, hey, it looks like Jupyter Notebook is supported in GitHub, Codespaces, Visual Studio, and there are some other kind of IDE out there as well. So, so when we talk about Jupyter Notebook in Azure Data Studio, we talk about the Jupyter Notebook open source format, meaning if you define it in Azure Data Studio, it should work with others. Now, there are some exceptions. So as an example, the Jupyter Lab or VS Code today doesn't support SQL kernel. You can still open it, but you won't be able to run it. So SQL kernel is only runnable in Azure Data Studio. So, which kind of makes sense because, Azure Data Studio is the data world, so to speak. Yeah. So if you actually published your, let me see here. So let me just go to my GitHub. So if you publish your notebook to something like, actually, I wonder if this works. If you publish a notebook to something like GitHub, even see how it's actually a SQL statement, and it actually records the output. When you publish it on GitHub, it actually will show you the read-only version. So this is one of the reasons why it's actually, having Jupyter Notebook is super useful for code sharing. And GitHub supports public and private repo as well. So you can do this privately and within your company. But if you are using Azure DevOps, there's also a Jupyter Notebook extension that you can use that it will allow you to kind of view the read-only version. So it's super handy that way. So yeah. Next is, I talked about this already. So Azure Data Studio support Git. So let me just kind of show you in a little bit. It supports rich data oriented kernels, so KQL. So if you're using Azure SQL, chances are you might also eventually have to learn KQL as well to manage the logs to a certain degree. If you have a large number of applications and development environments, and then you put all the telemetry into Azure Monitor logs, then it's a good way of analyzing your logs using KQL against the Azure Monitor logs. So that's where it's at.
Julia, I have a question. How did you rebuild the notebook? Did you just save as or certain file structures? How did you save it?
So this is a notebook. So essentially I just save, so Control S, and then it will save it as IPYNB. So I'm gonna keep it as, actually I'm gonna rename it. Try it, sample. So it's now saved as triad sample SQL. So if I close this, and then if I go back to, in a second, I have to go to my file here. Let's see. Where did I save it? I should have remembered to look. I think it's in the SQL notebooks. Oh, it's not. No, doesn't matter. I can use another sort of sample, right? So this is what it looks like on my file, my local file. So it's just an IPYNB. So if I do want to open it in, so let's just use this one. Let's see, open with Notepad. Let me just move my window across here. So this is what it looks like underneath. It's just a JSON file. Okay. Obviously, it's hard to read, right?
Yep.
But if I open it in Azure Data Studio, then you get something like this. Hang on, let me just make it bigger. So you'll see something that is a bit more readable. It's the same file, yeah. And this simple SQL notebook, I've already published it on GitHub as well. It's under simple demo. So, oops, I was just there. Or maybe I haven't checked in. Looks like I haven't checked it in, but yeah. So if I have checked it in, then it would have shown somewhere here. Oh, actually, maybe I'm in the wrong folder. There it is. So this is what it looks like in the same notebook, but on GitHub. Okay. All right. There are a couple of things that I wanted to show you, but let me see what makes sense next, because I do want to see if I can address that PowerShell SQL question. So like I mentioned in Notebook, so let me go File, New Notebook. It is possible to write PowerShell. So it's kind of waiting now. Okay, so PowerShell is running. I'm not an expert in PowerShell, so it's going to be pretty slow for me to type something new. So I'm just going to try this. So for example, something like this, and then write host $A. Let's see. Okay, so that's just PowerShell. So what you can do what I was saying before is if you have a PowerShell statement that you want to run, if you have a SQL statement that you want to run inside PowerShell, it is possible. And I just remembered there is actually a good example of that. So let me, gonna take me a little bit to search where it is. I think I found it. I think I did. Okay. Andrew, you with me? You still there?
Yep, I'm still here.
Awesome. Okay. So take a look at this SQL docs file. So essentially, this helps you to troubleshoot what our MS SQL Server 35250 is. And this is brand new. We're actually experimenting. Me and the Joseph, he's a CSS, he works in the CSS. So when he saw notebooks, he thought, hey, wouldn't it be nice if we can actually convert some of these docs file, especially that is for the purpose of troubleshooting, into notebooks. So essentially, the current docs article looks like this, where it has a select statement. So what would you do if you were troubleshooting something? You'd probably look at this and then you click copy and then you paste it somewhere, right? And then after that, depending on the results, you copy the next statement and then you paste it on somewhere like SSMS or something, right? Or maybe Azure Data Studio. And then the next thing you would probably see, oh man, I have to now check the endpoints, and I have to run this on DOS. So you're gonna go open a terminal and then write this, right? And then now you open a PowerShell and then copy this and paste it, right? And then now you go back to DOS again, and then now you go back to SQL again. So it's a bit of a nightmare. It's doable, but but it is kind of a bit of a nightmare, right? So we've just started experimenting this and see whether what the users or customers think. So folks like yourself, as an example. So if you click on Open Notebook in Azure Data Studio, and this must you can only click this, and it will only work properly if you already have installed Azure Data Studio. So if I click on it, it will ask me, hey, do you want to open this in Azure Data Studio? And I say yes. So this is good. Waiting for Azure Data Studio to open. So then it will ask me, are you sure you want to open this file? And I say, yep, go ahead, open it, download it from the GitHub content, because the equivalent notebook of the docs that I just showed you, which is a mix of SQL, Telnet, commands, DOS, PowerShell, and back to SQL again, has been translated to actually, if I remember correctly, PowerShell Notebook. So I'm going to say yes, because that's where the notebook is located. And this is what it looks like. And this is where it's actually sort of saying, hey, let me just scroll down, that way it's a bit easier to read. Hey, this is the server name, my server. This is the IP address. This is the SQL instance, and this is the function to run execute SQL query. And then what's going to happen on the next few ones, it's actually going to write the select statement as the SQL query. And you would see that the DT here is essentially like a table object in PowerShell. And it's passing the SQL statement to PowerShell, and PowerShell will run it and then pass it back as an object, which you can do interesting things like the rows count. And then in the next one, you can see that, hey, I'm going to run some more, select statements and then put it onto a new object, etc. And then it can be used. So this is sort of to illustrate that an idea of being able to run a SQL statement, passing it into PowerShell, and potentially being used in other areas. So things like the server name variable, which was actually defined on the top somewhere. It's here. It actually gets executed on the bottom here as well. So this is the telnet stuff, if I remember correctly. Let's see if there's anything interesting. And this is just doing another SQL statement. Yeah. Yeah, this
So
is
this
just
is
another.
yeah.
Sorry,
So
go
this
ahead.
is so it is essentially you're embedding your SQL statements inside PowerShell.
Mhm.
And I could see ways, like if I was going to do this, I might simplify it to say wherever possible, I would only have SQL query and one thing to run it, maybe,
Mhm.
just to make it easier, especially for regular users.
Mhm.
So can you use the data that, so you can use what gets generated in the essentially the variables in PowerShell you can use from one session to the other.
Yeah. So potentially you could do something like, say, let me just add a new code cell here, right? So you could say something like, if the rows.count is greater than 1, then do something else. Like for example, if something, that's something that you can do here, right? And then start typing things. Sorry, my pseudo code code cell here. So you can do, I don't know, write host here, and then else something else, which is interestingly, it starts auto-completing stuff. I don't know what happened just then. Yeah. So something like this. Yeah.
So I have a shortcut question here. The way that you get results from, say, SQL, can you get results from PowerShell the same way? Can you get it to format results as a table or anything?
When you say format as table in the output, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The way
so you might not get a nice table looking like, have I got one that I executed earlier? No, I don't. So you might not get, so let me just kind of connect again to one of these. Let's see. Yeah, this one here is fine. So which one? So when you put it as a PowerShell data table, and then you run it, like, essentially just kind of print that table, that object in PowerShell, you might not get a nice formatting like this, where you can, sort things and where you can filter wide world importers, etc. So you won't get big, nice looking table like this, but it's just kind of terminal looking PowerShell table, I suppose.
Okay.
Yeah. But you can, if you have a table obviously created in PowerShell, as in like the table object that I was referring to earlier, I'm not sure whether that's the right way of saying it, but if you want to insert it back to SQL, it's possible as well. Yeah. Yeah. So that's where we are at. Any questions? Any other questions, folks?
I did want to touch on, you made a statement earlier about variables, and with the SQL kernel, it's by session or batch, excuse me. So one of the things we've run into recently is it looks like we can't use parameter cells in the SQL kernel. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that's correct. So the parameterization is only supported for PowerShell and Python. In fact, Python is kind of the first language that we're supporting parameterization for. And then PowerShell is doable as well. I actually have not tried it using the run all as an example. So actually, let's give it a go. So Doug here is talking about parameterization, and this is an example of that parameterization where I would say, this is my parameter cell. So you will see this new parameters kind of tag here. So what happens is, if I run this, let's see, this is one of the features that I actually haven't fully tested myself. So I'm going to type in 35 and then press enter. Is it doing something? Don't think it is. Let's see. Let's try it again. Yeah, this is where it's a little bit funky where I said, oh, this is Python. What? Huh, interesting. Do I have to put that? Yeah, that's actually a bit odd. I was surprised that it's not running it. Interesting. Let me just try it one more time. Yeah. So it was supposed to be injecting a parameter and then you can run all. So I'm not quite sure what's happening right now. This is a bit odd. So
can you have other code in the parameter cell? Is that having print in there? Does that cause any issues?
Yeah, let's see. Let's try again. Yeah, it doesn't work. That's interesting. I'll have to tell the dev on this, the engineer on this. Let me check my other files. Hang on a second. Maybe I have another better example. I don't know whether my notebook here is a bit wonky or something else. So parameterization.
Julia, your Azure Data Studio connect with the SQL Server. It's your local SQL Server. It's not an Azure, is it?
I can connect to both.
Okay.
Yeah, I can connect.
I know that. I'm just curious. So you connect with your local SQL Server, I think.
Yeah, let's see. So this is one of the ones that I've created earlier. I can execute this. So this is a Python notebook. I can execute this using Papermill. So it does work for sure. So I'm trying to figure out, I have to find the right workspace ID. So hang on a second. So it's for the variable here. So workspace ID. Got it here. Okay. All right. So let's see if I could do this. If this runs. Ah, I remember now why it might not be happening. Okay. So this is my original notebook, right? And then when you click on the run with the gear, essentially run with parameters, it creates a second copy, which actually will paste in, which will actually create injected parameters. So one of the reasons why it didn't work on this one here is because I haven't saved my file, so it gets confused a little bit. So I'm gonna do silly Python here. And then let's try this again, and then do 25, fingers crossed, there you go, injected parameters. So then you can start run all, which you will get 25. So this is the method of injected parameters. I haven't tested PowerShell. It does work when it's executed from CLI, but I haven't tried it using the Azure Notebook itself. So sorry, I haven't used Azure Data Studio itself. So yeah. Any other questions? The next thing that I want to show you is a little bit advanced, which is executing using CLI. I can do that today as well.
That would be good. One thing I wanted to touch on as well is, so in the traditional SSMS SQL Server world, you know, central management server works really well for us. We can run a query across, you know, 50 instances, and it's great. And it looks like the idea of a notebook, you can't like run a query across multiple instances, but you could, I guess, maybe use PowerShell to go through the central management servers, then instantiate the notebooks. Is there have you any recommendations on how to do that?
Yeah, great question. Okay, let me tidy this up a little bit. And I'm actually trying to get to that. So I've got a couple of examples here. Now, there are three ways of executing notebooks, and depending on what you are using. So if you're using Python, then you would have to use papermill. So for now, I'm going to park that discussion since the group here is mostly interested in the SQL sort of world. So here's an example where I have an Invoke SQL notebook. Now, bear in mind, you can, I'm writing this in Notebook because it's easier for me, but you can actually do copy and paste this and put it on your PowerShell IDE wherever you want it, or even here if you want to. So you can sort of, copy this and then put it on the terminal as well if you want to. But since, Notebook supports PowerShell, so I'll just leave it here. So this Invoke SQL notebook is essentially a commandlet that allows you to run a notebook, which is the input file here. So in this instance, it's simple SQL notebook against server and databases. So in the example that you were saying earlier, Doug, related to running the same notebook against different server and databases, you would use PowerShell. Essentially, you would use PowerShell to traverse through the different databases or servers and then execute the notebook. And obviously, you would have to provide an output file as well, or ideally you want to provide output file so that this notebook you have executed against the server instance and database. Maybe put something meaningful in the output file that way it's always different, and maybe put a date or something as part of the name, whatever naming convention that you want. So that's the idea. So does that make sense?
It does, yeah. We were on that line of thinking. We just wanted to make sure, because there is an add-on or an extension for central management server, but it's only to allow you to connect to different instances that are registered under a central management server. It doesn't give you the ability to run a notebook across them. So we just want to make sure we're understanding it properly.
Yeah. So if you type in Invoke SQL notebook on your browser, you should find something like this, which actually gives you a lot of thorough documentation, I suppose, about how to use it, and like a lot of examples. I think about 10 examples or something, or maybe 6. Maybe I over exaggerated, but yeah, including the ones that if you want to run it against Azure SQL databases. So the one that I showed you earlier here, it's against a local, well, it's against a SQL server on-prem. Since I have what is it called? It's using my Windows authentication. Oh my goodness, I'm losing words. It's using my Windows authentication, so I don't have to do anything. But if you have to use Azure SQL, then you would have to start using username password or a way of doing some kind of token authentication. And this part will probably interest you, Doug, and I wasn't sure if I'm gonna have a chance to show it to you, but it looks like I do since it's relevant. Hang on a second. Let's see, home. Okay. So if you can do this, by the way, because it's just a PowerShell command, right? So if you have already kind of like a scheduling system or automated system where you want to run this on a regular basis, then you can use whatever your automated system, as long as it supports PowerShell. Hopefully PowerShell 7.1, I think it's probably the ideal sort of PowerShell that you want to use. So in this one here, let me just kind of show you in a minute. So here's an example of where I actually, let me make it a bit bigger. So here's an example where I'm actually using Azure Automation to invoke SQL Notebook based on whatever that is the parameter provided to this job. And I will show you what the entire flow looks like. And then after that, I'm just using, storage account token, etc. And then eventually it will actually get written to Azure Blob Storage. So, and this is just an example of once you can run things using PowerShell, it's very powerful for other things. And this is an example of it. Does that make sense? I can show you the full.
Yeah, no.
demo.
This is great. Yeah, this is good.
Yeah. Okay, so the next one, I will get back to this, by the way. So hold on to that. I want to show you this one as well, because in case you have a PowerShell notebook, because earlier Andrew mentioned about, hey, I want to run some things in SQL, but I want to use the results to do something else. So that means you would likely need to use PowerShell as a kernel. So here's an example of using a PowerShell, calling a PowerShell notebook. Test PowerShell.pynb. So let's see if I can open it up. That way you get to see what it looks like. Do I not have it? I created this a while back, so maybe it doesn't exist. Actually, here's the one that I could use actually. So there is a file called input IPYNB that Doug Fink actually created, and I'll show you what that looks like too, because it looks like I deleted my own file on the top cell. Yes. So this is what it looks like, but of course it's not readable. Actually, github.com Powershell Notebook. There you go. So Doug Fink is a PowerShell MVP, and he's been working with us quite a bit actually, because he loves the idea of notebook. And he actually wrote Invoke PowerShell Notebook or Invoke Execute Notebook that you can essentially extend your PowerShell capability to run input notebook with parameters, which is essentially what I'm about to show you. So the file that I wanted to run is this input IPYNB. If I click on the raw, this is what it looks like. And this is the path that I can use to paste here. So imagine this, I'm calling a notebook file that is stored somewhere on the internet, and I'm going to run it with my own parameter. So this is what it looks like. Let me just kind of double check, make sure that I don't have a, oops, sorry. I wanted to clean up this path for a little bit. That way I don't have a duplicated files. Let's see, it's called PowerShell output 2. Yeah, so I'm going to delete it so that way it doesn't get confused. So what I can do is probably write something like, maybe change the numbers a little bit, and then just execute this. Okay, so 0.7, 0.2, and then if I look up my PowerShell output to IPYNB, ta-da, so it becomes 0.7, 0.2. It is using parameters, and this is actually the injected parameter that Invoke Execute Notebook is doing. So it is a little bit longer than the usual that you see in Python, but I think it does a lot of kind of text on your behalf. So yeah, so that's the output of the execution.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, so I think this is what makes Notebook really powerful. The fact that you can create the same notebook so that you can execute it in Azure Data Studio anywhere you want to, as long as it's supported. You can use it, you can run Notebook in an IDE like this, but you can also execute it using a CLI command or from CLI, or using that commandlet. And you can also automate it. So that means your troubleshooting or your story of creating this documentation with code, you only have to create it once that can be used anywhere. It can be used as a one-off. It can be used as a silent one-off, which is essentially executing from terminal, etc. Or you can use it for scheduling, and that's what makes it powerful. So to that, I wanted to share this quick demo. So let's see if I can get it working properly. This is related to the one that I showed you earlier with the Azure automation. So let me see if I can just copy this All right, so I'm going to put something like, I don't know, deadlock help. And then I put in the server name and then I put in the database name, yeah? So I'm gonna create a task. So task has been created and it looks something like this. It's not assigned to anybody and I'm just gonna type in notes like try it, help, something like this. And then now I'm gonna assign it to me. So I'm gonna close this. What happens on the back end is I have an Azure automation job that actually an Azure Logic apps logic that will detect any new task assigned to me with the server name and database name, which will then execute that automation job that I showed you. Once it's finished executing, it will upload it to a blob storage so that I can access it. And I'm going to get an email as well. So hopefully this is going to run successfully. So let me go to my Logic apps here. Yeah, so there it is. So this is the Logic apps. Let me make it bigger. Is today at 31st? Interesting. Hasn't. Oh, there you go. See how it says running. It's 4:32 p.m. here PST, so it's still running. But if I click on edit, you get to see the logic. So when a task is assigned to me, create a job based on a template and then get the job output and then get the task details, then update the task details and send an email. So this is where, if I go back to the execute notebook here, which is an automation account. If I go to run books, I've got a lot of different kind of jobs, but this is the one that I was using in SQL Notebook. If I click on edit, so this is the one that gets run. So essentially it looks at the title that gets passed by the Logic apps to here. It tries to parse the server name and database name, and it will invoke the SQL Notebook against that server name and database name, and then post it to the output. So with that, let's see if I got an email. I did get an email. So the outcome is I got an email that says, hey, looks like you've been assigned to this deadlock help job. Do you want to open the resulting diagnosis, the pre-executed notebook, so that way you don't have to execute it yourself manually? And I say, yeah, that's sure, let's open it. So will ask me, do you want to open it? And it's actually opening it from my blob storage. And I say, yeah, open it. Let's see what it's got. So this is a DB diagnostic notebook, which I actually borrowed from Glenberry. So if you're a DBA, you should really look into Glenberry's diagnostic information queries. He's got a ton of them for different versions of SQL Server and Azure SQL Database. He has converted a lot of the queries from the SQL files to notebooks as well. So I just kind of pick and choose the different queries that I wanted to run. So for example, query 1 here, and then query 9. You can see that I actually got an error. That's why that's on purpose. So that way I know that it's executing not against my authentication, but it's against the Logic apps, or the Azure Automation Jobs authentication, which doesn't have access to run this. So that's good. So yeah, so there it is. It's pre-executed the analysis for me in Notebooks. And so when I get assigned a task, I don't have to run things manually. Everything is automated. I just have to look at the data to do the analysis, right? And then from that email, I can also click on it, click on the link to the planner, which essentially showed me this. So it added a bunch of things. Yeah, additional links, how to open the file, the notebook.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool demo. Thanks for showing that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so I think I've gone through a lot of topics today. I've also gone sort of a little bit off topic, so let me just kind of skip next. You can if you go to my GitHub, there should be this PowerPoint slide should be available, so you can take a look. But essentially, the next thing that you can do is if you have a SQL script and you want to convert it to notebook, then use convert to SQL notebook. Or if you have PowerShell script and you want to convert it to PowerShell notebook, then use convert to PowerShell notebook. And follow Doug Fink on PowerShell stuff. He's super awesome. So this is just to get you started. It's not going to solve all the problems in the world, but it's just to get you started in the notebook sort of world. You may have to do some tidying things up on your notebooks once you use the convert to. Yeah, and there are some other scenarios for notebooks as well, including deployment, which looks something like this, where you can define what you want it to deploy. So for example, Azure SQL database. So this is particularly useful if you're learning new things and you're not sure how to get started. We usually try to put some of these kind of new bits inside Azure Data Studio for you so that you can get started really quickly without knowing too much of PowerShell or the AZCLI, whatever that is needed to deploy some things. So here's an example of the wizards that you have to complete. Eventually, once this is done, it's going to create a notebook that looks like this, which essentially takes all the input from the wizards that you completed as a notebook, and then you can execute it. And because it's in a notebook, the beauty of it is if you have to repeat that creation, you simply just run the notebook again, as long as you've saved it before. So that's pretty neat sort of feature as part of the notebook. Yeah, so notebook use cases are pretty versatile, and specifically for SQL, I've shown you more on the operational sort of world, and a little bit on the notebooks for collaboration. And to a certain degree, the documentation, as you saw with the SQL docs, how you can now open up a file or open up a notebook inside Azure Data Studio. And I've also shown you the UX aspect of it, which is the deployment bit. And I think that's it. So these are just useful resources that I wanted to share with you. Check out Glenn Berry's, Rob Sewell's, as well as this SQL Diagnostic Jupyter book by Emmanuel, because it sort of, he takes a few different scripts, converted them to notebooks, which actually can serve really well as if you are a new DBA or if you want to start your own diagnostic sort of book. He has started collecting all these useful notebooks that you can start using. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I'm going to leave this page up, that way you can take a screenshot and whatnot.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much, Julie.
Yeah.
Let's see, Denise or Andrew, any more questions?
Yeah, I do have another question. That is source control. Does Azure Data Studio support putting notebooks under source control?
Yeah. So
yeah, no, you go on.
So this is my this is actually my my folder where I have my folder for GitHub repo. So essentially this is my local version, but it is source control. So I can start, say for example, let's see if I can check in some of these things, maybe this one here. So I've staged the changes. I'm gonna say update from triad to something like that. And then that's it. It's all checked in, and then all I got to do now is push, and it should be updating my GitHub repo. Yeah. So I implement a simple source control mechanism with that without convoluted PR review. In some cases, you may have to create a branch first and then raise PR and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, so it supports full Git source control. If you have Azure DevOps and you use the Git, not the TFS one, if you use the Git one, then you should also be able to use exactly the same thing as what I was doing here. Yeah.
Yeah, and that sounds like a really useful way to do sharing with small teams.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. This is what we use internally inside the Azure Data org as well. So yeah, so it's truly tested for us, and we continuously learning and improving the notebook experience, the Git, the ecosystem, the parameterization, the execution, and all that, because we internally are using this, so we want to make it work, and hopefully all the improvements that we do internally can help you externally as well, can help you communities and external customers as well. Yeah.
Okay, great. Denise, any last questions?
Well, as as a beginner, Julia, do you have any suggestions? Where should I start? I think this is a lot.
Yeah.
It was like overwhelming. I don't know where to start. Can you tell me where to start?
Yeah. Today, I actually blend my introduction and my advanced session all in one go, because the questions were really interesting. But if you want to get started, I recommend going to ak.ms, I think Azure Data Studio. Let me just open it up. It's my window thingy here. Okay. So on the Microsoft Docs, you would see some how-to guides and some tutorials. So tutorials are pretty straightforward about Azure Data Studio. So if I go to how-to guides and specifically to notebooks, this is a good way to get you started. And I'd recommend going through at least the notebooks overview and the SQL kernel part. And the parameterization that I talked about earlier, it is captured in the, for the Python part, the PowerShell and the SQL. Technically, SQL Notebook doesn't support parameterization, but there is the Info SQL Notebook bit that supports server name database parameterization. So we don't have that quite documented here. So that's something that we're working on. Yeah, so parameterization is fairly new for us as well. So yeah, stay tuned.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. A beautiful demo. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I learned so much because you never know. I mean, I used that too in my project, but I did not know all this.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a powerful notebook, just like a PowerShell. Better than PowerShell.
Yeah. All right. No, this is great. I'm very pleased that this has been useful for you. If you have any questions, let me know. You can reach out to my Twitter, MSSQLgirl, or you can also email me. My email address is not the easiest to remember, so I'm gonna show it again here. So yeah, if you have any questions, let us know. There's also Azure Data Studio Twitter account as well. So if you have any questions, some of us will definitely reply to you there. And last but not least, like I mentioned, with let me just open this up properly. So last but not least, as I said, Azure Data Studio is open source. As such, we publish all the source code here on GitHub. And if you have any issues that you think like, hey, I'm trying to do this, it doesn't work, what's going on, then just create a new issue. And then we usually triage this and then add it to our backlog, prioritize it, etc. Yeah, so this is another way to sort of get in touch with us as well.
Now, Julie, are you guys give free training sometimes, like you know, assign free training all the time from Microsoft Azure team? Or are you are you give some sort of like tonight, like during the day you give some training, free training?
Yeah, so specifically on Azure Data Studio, we don't have its own Azure Data Studio learning path as such, at least not today. But quite often, if you join some of the other MS Learn sort of training, you might see Azure Data Studio discussed there. We do appear in Data Exposed, I guess, channel. This one here. We do appear in Data Exposed a lot to share updates on what's going on. So I think we did one not long ago on Azure Data Studio, so you can search here on Azure Data Studio. Yeah.
Thank you. That's a
Yeah.
lot. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yep. Of course.
Well, thank you, Julie. Appreciate your time. This is well worth it. And Denise and Andrew, this will be, like I said, it's recorded, and I'll send out some links to some of the resources that Julie presented and get her slide deck out to you guys. So, well, thanks again. Everyone have a great evening.
Thank you, Doc. Appreciate all the work you had done, Doc. Thank you. See you in person
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah,
Doug,
great.
Right, see you.
Thank you
Bye.
very much.
Yeah, thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Right.